Good morning, guys. It's good to see y'all this morning. I'm Brian Phipps, the Next Steps pastor here. I have 3 children now, and they range from almost 18 down to 11. And they're all very unique children, different personalities, got to work with them in different ways and stuff like that. But as different as they are, they share a vocabulary development process that perhaps is shared with you, children you have, or children that you know. Without any training, as soon as my children turned 2, they had this unique ability to look right up at me or their mother and say, "No." You got it. You had the same thing. That's pretty cool. And then as they get older and they have siblings and they're downstairs playing or wherever playing, you can kind of sneak down the steps, and try to listen in and hear all the cute little things that they're saying to one another. And you hear one look over to the other and say, well, that one too. There's a lot of things that we do here. But the one I was thinking of was, "You're not the boss of me." Have you heard this one? "You're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me." And then they get older and they're thinking, "Dad, I'm 12 years old now. I'm an adult. I can make these decisions on my own." You've heard this before. Now, here's what I think I figured out about my own life is I've never really grown out of that. Have you? You tend to resist a rule from the outside. And that would be really cool if we were capable of ruling our lives in a way that made sense. Unfortunately, there's a lot of us that aren't ruling really, really well. And even those of us who are ruling well recognize that life is fragile. Some things could come along and upset this apple cart, and then all of a sudden, I'm not in as much control as I once thought I was. There's good news this Christmas. There's a good and there's an eternal King who wants to rule your life. We've got a picture of a great big throne up here because we didn't want anybody to miss it today. And we're going to have the opportunity throughout the day to ask ourselves the question, am I sitting on the throne of my life, essentially looking at Jesus and saying, "You're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me." Or is our posture with Jesus, this great King, one that's kneeling and saying, "You are the boss of me, and I want it to stay that way. In fact, I want that to increase more and more as my life goes along." Grab your notes out, wave them at me, let you know you got them. Awesome. I love that. My only hair drying episode of my week. Fill this in on the blank, if you will. Most Christmases, we talk about the details of Jesus' birth, and that's a good thing. It's a great story. We need to be reminded Jesus came to us in the fashion in particular that he did. But this Christmas, we're not going to be looking at the details of Christmas. We're going to look at the reasons for Jesus' birth. Why is he here? Why did he come? And we've been looking at this through the lens of the 3 roles that he plays in our life. You can see the 3 roles listed there. Priest was the first week. Prophet was the second week. And king is this week, if you'll write those in the blank. Just for a quick review, let's go back and talk about what each of those roles represents in our life. Week 1, Pastor Dan was up here talking about Jesus as our priest. And the priest is the Redeemer. He's the one that came to us to save us, to take our brokenness and God's holiness and somehow put them back together again through himself. He continues to walk with us, continues to heal us in that regard. The prophet, last week, Rob was up here talking about how Jesus is the revealer. He reveals truth. He reveals reality and how it is, not just our perceived reality of how we think things are. And he communicates truth to us to reveal things as they really are. This week, we're talking about Jesus as king, and it's his role to rule us as king and to command our lives, to tell us how to live. Now, this idea of king is one that we in America are fascinated with, but not one that we're subjected to. We don't submit ourselves to a monarchy at all. In fact, our history is rejecting a monarchy in England and coming over to the United States to settle it. Now, we are fascinated with the monarchy. William and Kate, the heirs to be, were just over here at New York City, and the tabloids were lit up about it. A lot of people fascinated with the monarchy. But again, we don't submit to it. In fact, we've set up a governing structure that's very different than a monarchy. We've decided to set up one with a president. And if we don't like him, we can vote him out after 4 years. And if he hangs in there, we can try to vote him out with the House and the Senate to be able to neutralize his authority. We've got checks and balances in the different legislature and judicial system and all to try to regulate who can be the boss of us, right? That's our structure. That's the way we're set up. But that's not the way things were going when Paul, the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts, chose to stand up and declare the nature of this Jesus King who had come. Paul was the main identity person, the central figure in the book of Acts. And in chapter 13, he's out on one of his tours trying to go from town to town to claim that the Messiah had come. And he says these words in order to talk to his audience about Jesus. It says this, Acts 13, 21 to 23. The people asked for a king, and he gave them Saul, son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin. What Paul's doing is going way, way back into the Jewish history because he's talking to the Jews at this point. And Saul ruled for 40 years. Well, after removing Saul, he made David their king. Now, I'm going to pause right there for a second because in that one little bitty verse is a whole lot. There's one king that's been on the throne for 40 years. He's got the army. He's got the assets. He has everything. But God rejects Saul as king in the middle of it because Saul had put who on the throne and taken God off? He put himself on the throne. So God pulls him out, says, David, you're going to be king. David has no army, no resources, no gold, no nothing. And there was a transition period of a number of years as that was happening. That's going to play big into what we learn this morning. Well, why did God give the throne to David? He says, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. Do you hear it there? He's got me on the throne. Now, those of you who know David's history know David messed up in grand style on multiple occasions. But every time he was confronted with the truth that he put himself on the throne and not God, he got back on the ground and kneeled before the throne. That's what it means to have a heart after God. He will do everything I want him to do. And from this man's descendants, God has brought to Israel the Savior Jesus as he promised. What Paul's saying here is, guys, remember the great King David? Oh yeah, he's our hero. He's our great king. The Messiah, the one that was promised through him, the King of Kings, is here. He has been here and he reigns. And here's our option with Jesus, guys. You can't vote him out. You can't wait for the next one to come. He is on the throne, and all we can do is accept him or reject him. That's really it. In whole or in part. We can say as a whole, I don't buy the Jesus stuff. I think that's just an elixir for the masses to deal with the realities of life, and so I reject him in total. That could be exactly where you are this morning. It's one option. If you're a longtime follower of Christ, there's a lot of you that you have knelt before the throne with Christ, but there's parts of you where you still have pieces of it on the throne saying, you're not the boss of me. You know, maybe my finances or my relationship with my wife or my purity or something else. We're just kind of holding on to that saying, no. I'm the boss there, Jesus. You can have the part of saving me, but you can't have the part of making me holy. We can accept his rule or reject his rule in whole or in part. But what I want to do is take a few minutes to talk about the difference between living life with Jesus on the throne and with something else on the throne, and then ask why in the world we wouldn't have Jesus. Here's your options. Write this in your blank. As far as who is ruling your life, you can have Jesus ruling your life, or you can have someone or something else. And I'm just, for space's sake, I'm going to write the word other. And what I want to do is talk about some of the promises that are found in Scripture about Jesus' role as king in our life. If Jesus is king, he promises certain things. And one of the things that he promises is protection. Would you write that in the blank? He says, I'll protect you. I'll keep you from great harm. And then the second thing he promises is provision. I'll provide the things that you need. Seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and you'll have all those things that you need. And then finally, he promises that he will give us peace. Protection, provision, and peace. I want to unpack how David experienced these things. David's being chased by Saul, right? Can you imagine what that would be like? The king that's there knows that God has selected you as king. What's he want to do? He wants to take you out, right? Completely take you out. So here's David, little shepherd boy, no resources, comes from the backwoods of Bethlehem. All of a sudden, the king with the army and everything's chasing him. And he's listening to these promises of, if I just keep God on the throne, I'll be protected for, provided for, and I'll have peace. Let's see if this actually works out for him. There's some crazy things with this protection deal, especially with David. Remember the little match he had with a dude named Goliath? Remember that story? Remember what country he was from? Anybody? Biblical scholars? Geniuses? Philistia. He was a Philistine. Remember that? Going way back. So he's this giant from Philistine, right? David kills him, beheads him. Guess who ends up taking David in and protecting him from mean old Saul? The king of Philistine. Brings him in, says, you can't have him. David goes in there, somehow tricks him into thinking he's on their team, and they buy it. He just slayed their dude not even 10, 15 years ago. So he's protecting him. So many times as David's on the run, foreigners provide him with food, with intelligence. There was one time David's camp was down in a ravine area by the Dead Sea. Saul knew about it, mounted up all of the army of all of Israel, said, we're going to go down and take them out once and for all. Somebody was sympathetic to David's cause that was in on that meeting, goes down, warns them, and they disperse before Saul comes down and annihilates them. Crazy, insane. Read through the book of 1 and 2 Samuel. The protection that David received, the provision that David received was incredible, and it caused him to have a sense of peace that was unparalleled. It was in the midst of all of that challenge that David wrote the 23rd Psalm, which is the psalm that gets read at almost every funeral because it provides peace in the most painful of all circumstances. It's on the run that David writes that. Now, does this mean God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life and it's on the beach sipping Mai Tais for the rest of your life? No. But it means that as you go through this, as he stays on the throne, you will be protected, provided for, and therefore have peace. Now, here's the funny thing. All these other things that we might put on the throne in our life promise those things, but deliver something very differently. I'm going to juxtapose Saul's life to this. Saul wasn't protected by God anymore. He was exposed to the enemy. All of a sudden, God pulls his protection back and away from Saul, and the once great king of 40 years is now afraid. And he's starting to lose resources. He's starting to lose strength. He's starting to lose support. He's not provided for. He is feeling empty more and more. In fact, God's not even talking to him anymore, so he goes and talks to a spiritualist, a medium, a palm reader, if you will, to try to get some type of guidance as to what his future is going to behold. He's exposed, he's empty, and what is he feeling? He's feeling exhausted. He gives up. In fact, at the very end of his life, he's on the battlefield against the Philistines who were chasing him down. And he doesn't even pray anymore. He knows that they're coming, and he asks a servant to just take his sword and jam it through his heart. He commits suicide right there. He's given up because he's exhausted. The other gods promise the protection and the provision and the peace, but they cannot and do not deliver. My question for us this morning is this: which of these two tones characterizes my life right now? Am I at peace? Are things okay? Or am I exhausted because I'm just tired? I've been exposed, been empty, and not fulfilled in the way Jesus says he wants to live my life to the full, or empower me to live that fully alive life. If you're exhausted, it's a king issue. If it's exhausted, We've got to ask ourselves the question, who is on the throne? Am I on the throne saying, God, you're not the boss of me? Jesus, you're not the boss of me. I'll run my own life. Or have we postured ourselves in a kneeling stance to say, you are king? Make sense? All right. Now let's jump and let's ask ourselves the question, why in the world would we not accept Jesus as our king? A couple of things here I want to point out. One, Jesus is the eternal king. Would you write that in the blank? This isn't a new idea of God, right? This has been going on for centuries. In Acts chapter 13, we read how Jesus is the fulfillment of the promise that was made to David. That promise to David was made 1,000 years before Jesus came. When I go back and read it from 2 Samuel 7, it says this, David, when your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I'm going to raise up from your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. He's the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom for how long? Forever. Will you circle that word right there? It's going to be forever. God promises David there will be a king on the throne of Israel forever. Isaiah 9, 3 centuries later, Isaiah promises this to remind the people that that king is coming. And this should be a familiar verse. It gets read every Christmas. It says this, for unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He will reign on whose throne? David's throne, there it is, and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on, and there's our word again, forever. That promise came true with the coming of Jesus, and then Jesus made another promise when he was here. He said, I'm not just coming once, I'm going to come back again. And when I come back again, the curtain closes. The curtain closes and my kingship will be restored. I mean, there's a part of me this week that was thinking, Jesus, if you're king of this earth, then why is this world in such a mess? You're not doing a really good job. Well, the reality is Jesus has enabled us to make choices. And if the world's messed up, it's because we haven't stepped up. But he's saying one day, your opportunity to be on the throne will cease to exist, and I will return, and I will be in full regalia, full power, full storm, and establish the kingdom the way it was meant to be. And I love this picture from Revelation 17. It says, they'll make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Friends, I want to be on that team. When he comes crashing through the clouds and all of this is done and the new kingdom is established, I want to be with the eternal King. Kneel now and be lifted up forever. But he's not just an eternal king, he's a good king. And this is the part of the morning that I find the most fun. He's a good king. Would you write that in the blank? I want to go through and just look at the different ways Jesus is good from Isaiah chapter 9. Jesus is wonderful, and what that means there in that word, in that verse, is that he's beyond the ordinary. He's extraordinary. He's supernatural. Just reminds me of all the times that people were awed by his teaching or wowed by his miracles or wowed by his compassion. It's just everywhere Jesus went, people went, wow. He's unbelievable. That's the kind of king that he is. Second, he's a counselor. What does that mean? It means that his rule empowers, not controls. He's not an arbitrary king that just throws down laws to just shove his weight around and see how mighty he is. When he rules, he rules with encouragement, with instruction on how to live life. I remember one guy was blind. He went up to him and spit on some dirt and made mud, put it on his eyes, and it says he commanded him to go across town and wash his eyes in a pool. He didn't command him just to be arbitrary. He commanded him because he knew that as soon as he got there and washed, he could see again. The commands of Christ are to build us up. The next one, mighty God, just simply means mightiest of the mighty. It means mighty, mighty person. I don't know why, but I'm picturing that little Mighty Mouse right now. Somehow, a little bitty thing, great big power. Here's Jesus, the mightiest of the mightiest of the mightiest, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's the story of Jesus in the boat with his disciples, and they're out on the Sea of Galilee. And I've been to that sea. It's like a big bowl. There's mountains on every side. And when the storm comes in, there's no place for that wind to go. And it whips up into a tornado, hurricane-like thing really quick like. And apparently this was one that the fishermen hadn't seen before. And they're all scared to death. Jesus is snoozing on the boat. I don't know how that worked out. But they wake up Jesus, and Jesus just stands up and goes, zip it, beat on, cease. And all of a sudden, this storm and this horrific experience that was going on was just done. And the disciples just looked at him and said, what was that? What was that? Even the wind and the waves obey this guy? And they're awestruck. He's a good king. He's everlasting. His rule will never, ever change. We have a president that will change every 4 to 8 years, and there's a lot of us that wait to make decisions with our personal assets or our company's assets based upon who's coming because policies change, and that impacts our economy in very, very different ways. This ruler says, my rule is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. You can bank on it all the way home. Death, as a matter of fact, didn't even cancel Jesus' agenda to love and redeem the world. And in fact, it fulfilled his agenda. He's everlasting. He's a father. I love this. We're his children, not his subjects. What kind of king does that? What kind of king says, let the little children come unto me. Call me daddy. Come on in anytime. I want to talk to you. I want to be with you. And then finally, Prince of Peace. His rule brings peace. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy. What kind of king is that, really? Right? There's 2 other things about this king I want to point out. He never asks his people to do anything that he hadn't already done. Love your enemies? Check. Pray for those that persecute you? Check. Give up your whole life? Check, you know? It's pretty amazing. Another thing about this king is that he can relate to every pain, betrayal, loneliness, fear, anything that you experience. He's experienced it as well and has told us that he'll walk with us. He'll never leave us as orphans, but he'll walk with us the whole way. That's a good king. And I'm left asking myself the question, why in the world would I let anything else rule my life? Why, what else? How do I look at that kind of king and say, you're not the boss of me? You know, that's the king I want to be a boss of me. I just want to tell you a quick story. This message just was so well-timed for me. The king was really good. And just keeping on with his character and just being good. I have personally allowed a good thing, and even a God thing, to get placed on the throne in my own life. And I was finding myself exhausted and didn't know why. My joy is going down, my fatigue was going up, and just life was just becoming under a blanket. I'm like, what's going on? I'm not doing anything like really bad. David was really bad, you know, and I'm not doing any of that stuff. And then I'm hanging out with Rob last Sunday night, and he's looking at the notes for this weekend. He goes, exhausted. That kind of describes you. I was like, oh, man, I better check that out. What's going on? Some of you have heard that we've got a couple of experiences here called Followers Made and Leaders Made. Got to be a part of making those things, and they've been a huge deal here at Westside. About 1.5 years ago, felt God nudge me to make those available to other churches. And so a company was created called Disciples Made to help get those things out. Several churches around the country starting to use it. I'm not a business guy. There's other people that are helping to build this, and they're wonderful. But for some reason, I had accepted the burden of making this God thing go. Now, you might be thinking, Brian, that's so little, that's nothing. Well, I don't know. It was killing me. And I remember Rob and Mike poking at me and asking me questions about that, and I realized what it was. I kind of put a thing that God gave me on the throne that was starting to rule me instead of the king ruling that whole situation. And we started praying. We were in a hotel room. I was just sitting on the bed with them, and we started praying. Before I knew it, I was on the ground like this, just crying, going, Jesus, I am so stupid. And I didn't hear him, but I'm pretty sure he said, yeah, I know. I said, no beep went off when I started to cross that line, but the bell started to ring with the exhaustion. And my encouragement to you is to hear this beautiful invitation from this king. I love this invitation. He says, whoever has my commands and obeys them, he's the one who loves me. He who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him and show myself to him. Man, that's a good king, isn't it? What's sitting on the throne in your life? I encourage you. We're going to give you some space here in the next few minutes. If there's a part of your life you've identified where you're looking at God and saying, you're not the boss of me, just literally step out from where you are and kneel. Whether it's right there in your row, whether it's up here at the stage, whatever it is, it's just a symbolic act saying, Jesus, I'm handing this one back to you. I'm done with it. You're the good king. I give it to you. Take your time and worship him.